Here is something that happens to nearly every English learner. Someone asks, "How was your weekend?" And they say, "Well, yeah, it was interesting. So on Saturday, I was meant to be going to the market at 10, but I was actually waiting for my friend because she said she'd come with me, but then she messaged me, actually, I think you might know her anyway." And the other person is nodding, smiling, being polite, but waiting impatiently for the conversation to end. We have all done this, even in our first language. In fact, often I find myself telling a story and then adding random, unnecessary detail. You know, you find yourself questioning, was it a Thursday or was it? No, it was a Wednesday morning. It happened on Wednesday morning. As I've said, we've all done this, but it gets even harder to tell a story or relay something that's happened when English isn't your first language, or in any language that isn't your first language. And the issue is when it's not your first language, you're trying so hard to find the words, you forget to tell the actual story. So in this video, I am going to show you how to fix that. Don't forget your free PDF, which outlines the content of today's lesson. Link is in the description. Now, why is storytelling so important? It isn't just a nice skill. It's what you have to do every time someone says, "Tell me about yourself." But more than that, if you're a good storyteller, you connect better with other people. So it's a really important skill to have, no matter what pocket of life we're talking about, whether it's work or whether you're engaging socially. The ability to tell a good story is invaluable. One of the first problems is rambling. Problem of rambling. It's not your grammar, it's not your vocabulary, it's that your brain is trying to construct the story while you are speaking. So it's doing many things at once. It is searching for the right words, checking your grammar, translating, working on how you sound. And the trouble is, while it is doing all those things, while it is juggling, it panics, understandably. And panic sounds like this. Well, so basically, so what happened was, basically, now those phrases aren't wrong and native speakers use them too, but they do become a wall between you and your main point. And so they become a wall between you and the person you're speaking to. So that is when you lose your listening partner. The solution is not to speak faster. It's to stop guessing what comes next. You need conciseness. You need a shape. Let me show you the difference. Here is a typical version with no structure. Oh, so last year this really funny thing happened. I was trying to get an interview. Actually, it was for a job that I really wanted, and I've been preparing for weeks. So anyway, I took the train, which I don't normally take, but that week my car was having an MOT. Anyway, that doesn't matter. So the train was late. I was panicking. However many seconds we are into that story, we're still nowhere. There's no point. What's happened? Okay, great. There was a job that you wanted and you were late to that job. So now listen to this. I once arrived at a job interview 40 minutes late wearing one shoe. Here is what happened. Immediately, you're in. So what's the difference? Every good story follows the same simple pattern. Where you are, what goes wrong, what you do, how it ends. That's it. I call it STAR, but honestly, the name doesn't matter. Let's break it down because it's the structure that matters. S is for situation, 1 or 2 sentences. Where are we? Who is involved? I was traveling alone in Japan for the first time. That's it, that's enough. The situation. Then we have the tension. This is the most important part of the story. What went wrong? What happened? What is the problem? I was traveling alone in Japan for the first time. Situation, tension. I got lost, my phone died, and no one spoke any English. That's the problem. Now we're interested. So what happens next? Action. What did you do? I found a paper map, an actual paper map, and just started walking. And I tried to match the symbols on the map to the street signs. So we have had the situation, the tension, the action. Now we need the resolution, and not something like, so yeah, it was fine. I found the hotel 3 hours later, completely soaked, and the receptionist said, we thought you weren't coming. Honestly, so did I. And that's it. That's the story. That's all you need, those elements. A situation, tension, action, resolution, a whole story. You need to cut out the unnecessary detail. Make it clear and concise, and you are far more likely to hook the person listening to the story. Now let's discuss one of the biggest mistakes people make. They start too early in the story. They give the context and the background and the backstory of the backstory. And by the time they get to the interesting part of the story, the tension, the other person is not listening anymore. There has been too much unnecessary detail. And the phrase that writers use for this is burying the lead. You might have heard of it. And it means hiding the most interesting part of your story somewhere in the middle. But good stories don't do that. They don't hide the interesting part somewhere in the middle. They start with it. Which leads us to a very simple rule. Find the most interesting part of your story. Lead with it, start with it, and then explain it. If you ever get stuck in your story, there are a series of phrases that native speakers use to keep stories moving. Let me tell you some of them now. To start a story, you might say things like this. So, this happened the other day. I had this strangest experience. You know when you just have one of those days? Well, this was one of those days. And now phrases to introduce the problem. And then, out of nowhere, the thing was, and that's when it all went wrong. Or even better, and it all went downhill from there. To move things forward. So I decided to, or at that point, I had two options. Either or, finally to end the story. And that's when I realized, or it turns out, I've never done that again. Notice all those phrases move the story forward. And a good story should feel like it's pulling the listener with it. One thing on length. Obviously, with this, I'm talking about telling a story rather than writing a story. Writing a story is a whole different scenario. For a speaking story or an anecdote, you don't want it to be too long. Ideally, 60 to 90 seconds. That's it. If you're still talking after a few minutes, ask yourself, am I adding anything to this story? Am I making it any more effective, any better? Because if not, the ending is a gift. Give the ending. Don't let the story just run out of steam, as we say. A good story isn't just about saying more. It's about saying just enough to make the person want to keep listening. If you want to practice, take something that happened this week, it can be anything, any event, and try to tell it in 4 sentences, one for each part. A sentence for the situation, a sentence for the tension, a sentence for the action, and finally for the resolution. It's actually more difficult than it sounds, but it works. 4 sentences, that's it. Don't forget your free PDF outlining the content of today's lesson. Link is in the description below. If you want more on how to sound natural in conversation, you might enjoy these videos. And of course, you can always subscribe so you don't miss another one. Take care, and hopefully I will see you in the next one. Bye.